and welcome to another episode of By a 5-Year-Old. In today's episode, quite possibly one of the worst jobs I've done, where I agreed to something and then I had to go through with it. I ended up machining these, which is a bottom bracket for a track axle for a rotor crank. And I'll talk you through how that happened. However, the provenance of the titanium that's in these, I just can't describe how much pain that I had to go through. So this is a Rotor Aldhu track crank. Now it might not seem, overtly different to some other crank that you may get or may not get, but there are a few issues with this. The biggest one is the axle. Let me describe the mechanical problem first of all. This is a Rotor Aldhu crank, and this is the track crank variant of the Aldhu system. That Aldhu system is available in 24mm and 30mm. Now this came from China, so a customer in China sent this for a custom bottom bracket to be made. The reason he wanted a custom bottom bracket is he was having difficulty trying to fit this into a BSA style bottom bracket for his track bike. Now this may not seem completely crazy, but Rotor have a very narrow DBCA. So the normal bottom brackets, which is like this one, so that's a Shimano bottom bracket, has a DBCA of 90.5. So if you go and get your caliper out, okay, it's 90.6, but there or thereabouts. That's how much it should be. In the case of this is way under that, so it will not fit. This is the Rotor non-drive side crank arm. On there is a preload adjuster and the female taper, which bolts onto the male taper, which is here. So you put that on and then tighten this up like that. You'll get to a predefined torque, and then that sets your DBCA, which is the distance between crank arms. So the recommended torque is 35 Newton meters. I'm just going to do this hand tight just to show you. So this isn't tightened all the way up, but you can see we've got like 85mm, which is way under the 90.5. The other problem is BSA was never designed for a 30mm axle. So that's 29.97 is near enough 30. Normal BSA was designed for fairly well, it was actually designed for square taper, but that's a 25mm bearing in there with a 24mm top hat. This is the bottom bracket that was designed, or these two threaded inserts were designed for the axle. You can see it's considerably bigger to accommodate the axle, and it's also considerably thinner to accommodate the DBCA. So instead of making this out of an aluminium alloy, this had to be made out of titanium or steel. The customer at the other end, when he was given the price in titanium, didn't really want to do that, and he didn't want the weight of steel. So what he elected to do, and I'll talk about this later, is he elected to get some titanium from a place called TaoBao. I think it's the Chinese equivalent of eBay, and that's where these things were made from. So the actual original length of the titanium bar was like that long, it was 6 inches long. And the trial ones, which were all screw-ups, ended up coming off. So that's what we're left with after all the trials have gone through. I'll mount this up and then show you how this works. And before I go any further, and before I forget, this is effectively the spider, so it's a solid disc. In order for this to work with the bearings that he requested, so he wanted NTN bearing 6806, had to machine a very small amount off the inside of there, so it would give him clearance into there. Okay, that probably looks worse than it is, but it's actually only about a millimeter. The rest is just a polishing mark. There wasn't really much in it. It was designed for 52, or 51 and a half, and I went up by about 1.5 mil just to give the clearance to there, so there's not a very big gap. This is the look frame. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to thread this in to show you. It's an ISO bottom bracket. That side feels alright. This side doesn't, so let's just this bottom bracket uses a standard 6806 tool. You can get these in my web shop. They're designed to fit any bottom bracket that I use that has a threaded 6806 bearing in it. So that's what that is. We can put that on and just give it a hand tight. I'm only doing this for show more than anything else. I'll do the same on the other side. Half the problem is the tooling in order to make sure that you get a good fit and no gap around the outside. So that bottom bracket on the look back's been faced, but nonetheless we still have to do it anyway. Next job is to put the axle through. So it comes through from the drive side, through onto this side, and then we can get the crank arm and then bolt that up. Okay, so now this look frame is slightly on the shorter side, so we've still got a bit of play in there, so we can adjust the preload adjuster, get this to go all the way around. And now that's preloaded and all the play's gone out. I'll bolt the other side on just so you can see. On this side there's a small white mark at the top, which is where the disc or the spider bolts on, so we just line those up. Like that, and then get the other crank arm, put that on. Like so. So as we bolt this up, this will clamp everything together. The stiffness in here is totally on the strength of that taper. There's nothing else holding it in. That feels like 30 Newton meters. So that's all bolted up, the preload's adjusted, and then we can spin it round, and that is pretty good. That bottom bracket took me 4 months to make. On this side you can see the clearance, yeah, bollocks, in there. It's extremely tight. It's only a 1/4 of a millimetre, something like that, to give clearance so that this does not rub. Right, it is that time of the show again. It is time to see if the pen on PowerPoint is working. Pen working. Just to keep the YouTube police happy. TaoBao Titanium. Buy a tit, that'll be me. A lesson learned. This was a bit of a painful experience, but never mind. By Hambini, aged 5. Bit of history. So this this was a bottom bracket from a repeat customer. So a chap who lives in China. Yes, I do export to China. Bought some bits off me previously, and he wanted a bottom bracket for his bike. This is the kind of brief history of what he's got. So he's got a track bike with a track crankset. A standard BSA 30 will not fit because the DBCA, distance between crank arms, which we'll come to, is too short. And if you are going to go and buy a new crankset, please do look out for that because it stings loads of people. He got the crankset quite cheaply and he wanted the quite narrow Q factor.
He was also quite adamant, and I can understand why, he wanted NTN bearings in there, and especially genuine ones, because they do make a difference, especially when you are on full load. After all this, weighing all this up, I had to do some stress calcs. Aluminium was unsuitable, steel was a bit too heavy, and in the end the customer wanted the titanium because he wanted a lightweight, and also titanium is a bit blingy. Now, I quoted him for ArcelorMittal or ThyssenKrupp, which is basically Klöckner titanium metals in the UK and also in Germany. But it was really, really expensive, extremely expensive. So he went and sourced some titanium from a place called TaoBao. And we will come on to what that is in a minute. If you need to know what DBCA is all about, there is a page on my website which I will link to below. It is effectively the distance between crank arms. So this is a drawing to help you, but it shows you in practical terms. Now, on tapered, typically tapered axles, you can have the objects, which are the crank arms, moving further in or further out, depending on the manufacturing tolerances, how much torque you apply, and how many times you've done it. Because every time you move that crank arm in and out, it tends to deform either the crank arm or the axle. This is Klöckner. If you are in an English-speaking country, that O with the umlaut, which is the two dots above it, would go to OE, but it's pronounced Klöckner. And they are one of the largest metal distributors in Europe and also in America. They've got a very good reputation. You typically get the metal from ThyssenKrupp or ArcelorMittal or somewhere like that. It's fully traceable. So in aero, that will be an approved supplier. You can also go to these sort of, how can I put it, people who will buy metal on the open market. And that is a bit of a ropey area. Admittedly, the metal is always cheaper, but the traceability is not there. So the big screw up for me was pricing this up as a fixed price job, and that was, in hindsight, a mistake. Or you could argue the other mistake was agreeing to use the TaoBao titanium. I went through endless cutting tips, bits and pieces, all sorts of hassle with this. I just could not believe it. There is something that's not quite right, and I don't know where it is, but I probably will never find out. But it took endless amounts of machining. I mean, oh god, it was painful. The engineering time involved, everything was just it was a nightmare. This was a total nightmare job. If I was to price this up, it'd be easily more than $4,500 in bits, engineering time, fanning around, all that kind of stuff. Now, some people might say, oh, you should have just shit-canned the job and then stopped. But that is probably one of my character flaws, which is, I'm the engineer's engineer. I always want to, it's not so much pleasing the customer. Obviously, you do want to please the customer, but it's because you don't want something to get the better of you. And it's a fatal flaw that I have, and it's been mentioned to be many, many times that I will just go out and try and finish the job. This is the TaoBao website. Now, whenever I click on any of these, it asks me to log into something, or whatever that means. Mixed nuts, Jägermeister and Mary's Cherry Perry's. Basically, apparently, it is like eBay for China, and you can get all sorts of stuff on there. So dresses, bed linen, biscuits, everything. And obviously you can get titanium. Now, given the population of China, you could probably find all sorts of Now, when I was having trouble with the material, I got back in touch with the customer, and he got him back in touch with the seller. The seller sent this mill certificate, which is a kind of traceability document for the titanium. And there was a little caveat with this, and he said, it's not exactly what you've got. Okay. So what's the point of having it? Anyway, I'll draw your attention to a few things. First of all, the size. It's obviously more than 15 millimeters, and that's by the by, it's like 50, it was 2 inches, so 52 millimeters. This spec, you can download it, but if you go to Chinese national standards, they will want to pay, you have to pay a pretty premium to download that. It's a couple of $100, I think. If someone knows how to get that standard for free, you know, please do ping it to me. I'll be very grateful. And then the other two things which are a bit unusual is this is blank and this is blank. And I don't know what that stamp says. And given the timings involved, the dates look awfully too close to when I got hold of it. So usually it's about, you know, a few months between when it's milled and when you get it. But this one's like, it was within a couple of weeks basically, but by the by. The stress on here for the tensile strength is 950. You usually quote like 1,000, so it's not that far off. So I think that's the minimum. Not sure what this is all about. It obviously relates to this standard, so the RP and the RM will have an associated definition, which I don't know what that is. I don't know what M is. T per C, is that the thermal coefficient of expansion? Don't know. Ultrasonic inspection, not sure why you would UT a piece of bar stock. Yeah, I don't know about that one. I've no idea what that says, or that, or that, or that, or that, or that. In fact, I don't know what most of it says, so there you go. Now, I will draw your attention to this logo here. Now, it took my eye for another reason. So it's Baoji Chuanghui Titanium Products Co. Limited. So this is that logo. I've zoomed in. This looks strangely familiar to me. When I looked at it, I thought, looks like a payslip. That is the Toyota Formula One logo. And you might be thinking, how has he gone and recognised that from that? And that is because I used to work there. So that is Toyota Formula One headquarters in Cologne, in a place called Marsdorf or Junkersdorf. It is on the southwest side of Cologne, and that's my car parked outside. Actually, I don't know why I took the pictures. Anyway, that is where that is. So yeah, don't know. Something ropey going on there. I mean, it's even got the little bit of the F. Yeah, that little nick there is there, so it just looks like a straight copy. This is one of the cups that was machined up. Don't take this as gospel because I've frigged some of the dimensions to try and stop people from copying it, but no doubt they will. The telling thing from this is, first of all, I mean the clearances and stuff like that, so the bearings come right up to the periphery of the cup. If you take a cut through here, like this, I mean this is small clearances, so the shoulder, you know, that's the section through it. Again, I've fiddled this point here. You have to have a bit of a clearance to this part of the bearing because otherwise it will rub and touch. Between here and here is like 1/4 millimeter. It's very, very tight. Normally I wouldn't advise doing that, but the customer was, you know, that's what he wanted. So that's where we go. Now, this is the cup with a section, well, it's split, it's cut in half. Again, the loading on here is not real, so don't take this as gospel. It's a fictional loading, and it may not be accurate. Read that as it's not. The problem around this is, well, it's twofold. The first is BSA 30 or 30 millimeters wasn't really designed to go into a BSA hole. So BSA is, it's like 35 millimeters on the outside, and you've got a 30 mil axle going in between. You've also got to get the threads in there, so you've got like 1.75 millimeters either side for the thread engagement, so it's quite weak. That is coupled with this particular short axle or track axle DBCA. It places a huge strain on that joint there. Now that joint in BSA applications is quite critical, and it's very, very important that if you are installing this, the frame has to be completely flat. If you end up with one like, for example, the Bertoletti Legend, that wasn't flat. So if you start to screw this in, you will probably end up breaking the bottom bracket. If you're just having a normal BSA with like a Shimano crank, I mean the thread thickness around the threads is like 5 or 6 millimeters, so it's no problem. Whereas this, you can't do that. So it's very, very thin, and then you've also got this very thin, highly stressed point, which is the reason you need to go to steel or titanium, or I mean, 7000 series aluminium is not ideal. You're probably running the risk of it snapping. Now, you can mitigate it, obviously, if you have the frame completely flat. I do have a section on the website that's specifically about that, because plenty of bike shops in particular fit these to non-flat frames, and not necessarily Hambini ones, but I've seen Hope ones and a few others where they've screwed it in and then it snaps, and it's quite, you know, it's extremely common. It's probably going to be the next press fit problem, which is the 30mm axle into a BSA bottom bracket. We've already had 30mm axles into BB86 bottom brackets. This is going to be the next one. And that is it. Now, if you did enjoy this, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe, and hit me up on Patreon. Obviously, you know, no one really likes to share failures and stuff like that, but at the end of the day, job got done, and we move on. But it was a serious lesson learnt for me. Right, that's it. Until next time, and as always, keep banging your hairdresser.